So let's talk through every edition's Warhammer 40k launch box or big box starter set, and with the benefit of hindsight talk about which ones look like they were the best or worst, and which ones you actually bought. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Warhammer 40k big boxes, and in this video I wanted to talk through the major boxes for each edition. They were initially starter sets up until 8th edition, and then Games Workshop changed things around to launch boxes for 9th and 10th. Basically, these are the massive Great Exciting boxes that start out each edition, containing the big rulebook for the game, plus 2 armies of miniatures with which to duke it out and start a 40k collection. To shake things up, I thought we'd go through in order of which ones you liked most, starting with the ones that were voted the least popular, and moving forward towards the one that was voted the most popular in 40k history. Jumping straight into it, and out of 40k's 10 editions so far, 8 of them had starter boxes. The first Rogue Trader edition of the game didn't really have one on the same sort of level as the rest, and 7th edition didn't really get its own one either. It just used the same Dark Vengeance box set as was available for 6th edition, maybe understandable given that those two were quite close together. That means that the one that was voted the least popular was 8th out of 8, and that does seem to be the recently re-released Battle for Macragge box set, Space Marines vs Tyranids fighting it out on the frozen wastes of Ultramar. This was a box set from 2 decades ago now in 2004 and came out for £40, which is around about £68 or $86 inflation adjusted. And you can certainly see the price creep on Warhammer between this time. Games Workshop recently re-released the same miniatures in this set for $150, not too far shy of twice the original price accounting for inflation. In the box set, you got some Space Marines with 10 Space Marines alongside an Imperial pilot, 10 Termagants, 6 Gene Stealers, and 8 Spore Mines for the Tyranid half, and then that admittedly rather awesome Crash Shuttle terrain piece, Force Field terrain, and some Tyranid terrain bits as well. I feel like what maybe put people off a little bit was that it's a fairly even split between Nids, Space Marines, and terrain sets, and perhaps the single biggest attraction to actually getting the box set was weirdly enough the Crash Shuttle, which I know a lot of people had a lot of love for. I think it still holds up as very cool terrain to have as like a scattered sort of purposes on a gaming board. I feel like the models do feel perhaps a little bit on the anemic side though. Say if you're buying it for Space Marines, you'd literally just be getting one tactical squad that you can use in game. You could just literally buy one of those separately. So it didn't really feel like you were getting any sort of saving or incentive to pick up from an army point of view here. And the Tyranids were a little bit better, though maybe not very. I thought it would be interesting as well to see which of these people actually bought if they were collecting at the time. So I asked people, were they actually collecting 40k, and if so, did they pick up this starter set or not? Perhaps unsurprisingly, given that this one was the lowest rated popularity-wise, it does look like it was the biggest one where people chose to skip rather than buy it. Almost twice as many people who were actually collecting at that point chose to skip it as opposed to pick it up, which is far less than most of the rest. I guess I was in that camp myself. I was in the early days of collecting Space Marines when this came out, but I didn't think it was worth picking up for the tactical squad, and I wasn't really that bothered about the Tyranids and terrain. Moving on, and ranked 7th out of the 8 by you, was the 2nd edition starter set from Warhammer 40k, which came out in 1993 and cost £35 when it released, so that one was a further 11 years before the Battle for Macragge. And adjusting for inflation, it seems like it was a similar sort of value proposition to Battle for Macragge in terms of how much this might have been seen being costed. This one was the first true 40k launch box / starter set type thing compared with the rest, and in this one you got 20 of the old school plastic tactical marines, 40 Orc Gretchen, and the old slightly infamous cardboard Orc Dreadnought, literally just a drawing of a Dreadnought propped up on a stand. Beyond that though, you did get really quite a lot of terrain for the game, dice, templates, battlefield rules, some data cards, tokens, a painting guide, a scenario book, reference sheets, and Codex Imperialis. There was really quite a hefty amount of paper with this one. Personally, I feel that this one being voted in 7th is actually kind of unfair to it, given the time it actually released. Sure, I guess looking back on it today, the miniatures really aren't up to much compared with modern standards. They're almost entirely monoposed copies of the exact same thing, which isn't really very exciting. But understand from the time when this was released, it was really quite a big deal, and a big step towards making Warhammer 40k the wargame it is today, compared with its original form in Rogue Trader. I thought it was interesting to see the buy or don't buy poll for this one. Looks like out of current Auspex Tactics viewers answering the poll on that channel post, only 12% of you are old enough to have had this as a buying option when you were still collecting Warhammer. So out of people who have stuck with it for the next 25 to 30 years, the vast majority of you chose to pick this up, It looks like it was 10% picked it up when 2% didn't. Out of launch boxes, this is the only one that was truly before my time, so I never got to experience this one myself. I did see quite a lot of the models going around second hand though. Lots of people had reams and reams of those Gretchen models. Next up, and voted in 6th by you guys, was the box that followed that, the Warhammer 40K 3rd edition starter set, the one with these iconic Black Templars on the cover that inspired the recent Castellan miniature for them. This one came out in 1998 and cost £50 at the time, so interestingly more expensive than the Battle for Macragge on launch. This one did come with the big full hefty rulebook though. It translates to around about £92 or 117 US dollars, adjusted for inflation to today's prices, and last year Games Workshop did a made to order for just the actual gaming miniatures for $100, though you didn't get the ruins and the jungle trees and things with that. In the box set, you got the new and upgraded Tactical Marines from the 2nd edition one. These were a bit chunkier and had a bit more posability. There was a Space Marine Land Speeder, a basic one with either a heavy bolter or a multi-melter, 20 Cabalite Warriors for the Drukhari, and then a few fairly nice bits of terrain with some ruin corners plus some jungle trees. Again, I feel like this one feels a little bit dated by more modern standards, though I'd bear in mind that even adjusting for inflation, this would cost a lot less than the modern kits would. Less than half the price of the Leviathan box set, for example. Still though, I feel like people tend to gravitate a bit more towards the box sets that really put the focus on the miniatures, so maybe that's part of the reason why people have voted the ones with the highest amounts of terrain into the last few places. In terms of people actually buying it, this one's a lot more mixed than the 2nd edition one. Looks like for people who are actually collecting during this era, there was about a 50-50 split between people who picked it up and people who didn't. I guess since 2nd edition, there was a few less miniatures in the box, even if there was the trading out of 20 Gretchen for a land speeder, and the miniatures I think were better quality. Perhaps having the Dark Eldar as the antagonist faction wasn't the single most appealing choice, given that they're a bit more of a niche army compared with some of the rest, though you did get a pretty heavy slant in terms of points on the board for the Space Marines. Next up, and voted in 5th place out of the 8 for you guys, was the 6th edition box set Dark Vengeance, and this one ran for 5 years again. It was also the box set for 7th edition, which very quickly followed 6th. This one came out in 2012 and was 110 US dollars at the time, 146 inflation adjusted, so really quite a lot more than some of the ones that we've seen so far. This one felt like it was the second of the more new generation of these launch box starter set type things. With Assault on Black Reach, the previous one to this, Games Workshop really shifted the focus from terrain plus armies just to focus all out on armies, and this one got you a little force of both Chaos Space Marines and Dark Angels. The Dark Angels had a Librarian, Company Master, Tactical Squad with plasma weapons, 5 Deathwing Terminators, 3 Ravenwing Bikers, and there was a Chaplain also in the limited edition set. For the Chaos side of things, they got a unique Chaos Lord, 7 Chosen, 20 Cultists, and a Hellbrute. I think it was the first place that you could get the Hellbrute model if memory serves. Overall, definitely feels a lot more modern 40k. You're getting 2 mini armies on each side rather than just a scattering of units, and it was a box set full of entirely new sculpts as well, as opposed to things that you could buy elsewhere in the exact same form. I kind of wonder if the overall slight unpopularity of 6th and 7th edition didn't really do this one any favours. And the Space Marines were kind of frustrating for people who didn't collect Dark Angels. They might have really wanted to add new Terminator squads and bikes and things into their army, but I certainly saw a fair few people having to do the hobby effort of just basically removing all the Dark Angels iconography if you say wanted to run them with your Ultramarines or Salamanders or something. Again for this one, in terms of actual reported sales for people who were collecting at the time, this one again seems to be roughly 50-50 on this. And again, that is lower than any of the other more modern style 40k starter sets. Then we've got 2 kits that were ranked so close in the voting that I think it made sense to put them both joint third. And first up, here we have the 9th edition starter set Indomitus, perhaps one of the biggest and most well-known boxes in 40k's entire history. This one came out in 2020 and was just shy of $200 to purchase. That'd be 234 US dollars inflation adjusted. Indomitus basically took and expanded the concept that they started with Dark Imperium and made it go even further. 2 really quite big chunky armies all in a massive launch box, and this one truly was a launch box in that you could only buy it at the start of the edition and then it went away and ceded itself to starter sets that took its place. For the primary Space Marines in this one, you got really quite a clutch of characters: a Captain Lieutenant, a Blade Guard Ancient, a Chaplain and a Judiceer. 3 Blade Guard veterans, really quite cool new Primaris Marines with their power swords and more old school Knights in Space sort of tone, Outrider Bikers and Eradicator Multi-Melters and 10 Assault Intercessors. All of the actual Primaris units were entirely new additions to the game. Otherwise, the Necrons had a whole bunch of units from their big range overhaul: an Overlord, Royal Warden, Scorpec Lord, Plasmancer and Cryptothraus, then 3 Scorpec Destroyers and their Plasmacide, a Canoptek Reanimator, 20 Necron Warriors and 6 Scarab Swarms. This one really had quite an impact coming out during the time of the pandemic. I think a lot of people were just hyped and looking forward to anything that they could look forward to, and a big box of Warhammer that you can order in and assemble in your own home fit the bill quite nicely. It also maybe felt like it was capitalising on a whole bunch of people who'd re-joined the hobby in 8th edition. There were loads of people who got back in on the action then, and for a lot of people this was the first time that they were witnessing a really big release of a box set like this. It looks like the majority of you who responded were collecting Warhammer at a time in which you could buy the Indomitus box set, and for people who chose to or not, it looks like it was slightly slanted towards people buying it, around about a 60% ratio or 46% versus 36. Overall, I think it is a really cool set. 2 genuinely quite chunky armies of Space Marines and Necrons going against each other. I think it was about 1,000 points of each, and tied in with the entire Pariah Nexus storyline with Rabute Gilliman's Indomitus Crusade, running into an area of space that the Necrons were busy reclaiming with the Silent King at their head. There was a bit of a fiasco around the launch of this as well, seeing as Games Workshop underproduced it and had to rapidly say that they were doing a second run, but at least that meant that the majority of people who wanted this were able to get one. Ranked evenly with this one was a box set from far earlier, the 5th edition Assault on Black Reach box set from 12 years before Indomitus in 2008, and this one was only $75 on release. That's $106 inflation adjusted, but still around about half the cost of Indomitus. Assault on Black Reach is definitely one of my favourite ones. Contained within there was a captain, 10 tactical marines, 5 terminators and a dreadnought, and on the orc side there was a warboss with a power claw, 20 orc boys with slugger and chopper, 5 knobs and 3 deathcopters. I feel like this one just had a pretty good feeling because it followed the Macragge box set, which just was really quite miniature light in terms of actual models to put on the table in your games, and I think most people consider this one just a really good deal for the amount of miniatures that you got from it. A good discount for the cost, and was potentially even a box set that you could buy in multiples if you really wanted to. It does feel kind of funny that this one didn't really cost all that much more than the Battle for Macragge box set, but basically got you something that felt like an entire mini army rather than around 1.5 units per side. As a result, the Assault on Black Reach box set was very popular indeed. For the people who did have the opportunity to pick up, it looks like around about 75% of people said that they did according to this poll. And it looks like it would actually be remaining a pretty good deal on miniatures all the way up to this day. I think it perhaps helps that Space Marines and Orcs are both very popular factions to collect in Warhammer 40k. The poster boys themselves, and then the big fun violent faction that's absolutely a fan favourite. With the joint third ones done, that just leaves us with 2 remaining, and voted second by you guys was Dark Imperium, the 8th edition starter set that was the last one that was an actual starter set that persisted for the entire edition, rather than being a more launch box type thing that 9th and 10th got. This one came out in 2017, so 5 years after Dark Vengeance, and was $160. That'd be around about $200 adjusted for inflation now. This box set really does feel like it was the one that maybe kickstarted the modern era of Warhammer 40k. It accompanied a full hard reset of the rules, with the core rules being rewritten and all armies getting faction-specific indexes, something that I really liked given that the older style rules have become ridiculously bloated over the years. It was also the edition that launched the Primaris Space Marines and the new Death Guard range, both alongside their Primarchs for Rabute Gilliman and Mortarion. Lots of excitement around that, and while the Primaris lore didn't necessarily go down great with everyone, most people enjoyed the miniatures well enough, big and chunky, quote-unquote true-scale Space Marines. In this one you got a Gravis Captain, 2 Lieutenants and an Ancient, 10 Intercessors, 5 Hellblasters and 3 Inceptors, all of these being entirely new miniatures and new units to the game with their own datasheets. For the Death Guard you got the Lord of Contagion, the Malignant Plaguecaster and the Noxious Blightbringer. They headed up a fluffy 7 Plague Marines, alongside 20 Poxwalker zombie hordes, plus a feated bloat drone. Considering this also contained the core big rulebook, then for $160 at the time I don't think it was really that bad a deal at all. And it was paired with some fairly excellent starting sets, such as the No No Fear one, where you could get most of these miniatures in an even cheaper and more focused format if you wanted. Again, as voted in second here, it's maybe not too surprising that a lot of people picked this up. Both the armies included within were not really just new sculpts of old things, but entirely new things in their own right, and there was a lot of appeal for Primaris and New Death Guard, and this one was available all edition as well for people who wanted to pick it up, which I guess might have been helpful for some people. Looks like slightly more bought it than didn't, though it's nowhere near as big a majority as, say, Assault on Black Reach. I do kind of wonder if there might be some sort of bias in that the people from 5th edition who are still engaged with the hobby might have been unusually likely to pick up the core box set, as it kind of selects for people who were going to be into Warhammer long term. Finally though, and ranked first by you guys, though not by a huge margin, was the current 10th edition launch box of Leviathan. It seems that people are sufficiently pleased with Games Workshop's most recent offering to rank it the best above all of these very good kits before. Most of you won't have to think back too hard for this one. It came out last year in 2023 at time of recording, $250 US. That'll have crept up a bit due to high inflation within the year for plenty of people around the world, but adjusting for inflation it was still slightly more than Indomitus, though maybe not hugely so, as that was $234. Leviathan again did really feel like it was just trying to be Indomitus but better, and I feel like for the sheer amount of plastic contained within it probably achieved that. The Space Marine side maybe feels somewhat equivalent to the Indomitus box set in terms of massive models. You got 4 characters, 20 infantry in the new and more chunky Terminators, and perhaps the most impressive thing was the big bad Ballistus Dreadnought. That's the single biggest vehicle that's been present in any of these starter box sets. The Tyranid Force though just feels like you get vastly more and bigger miniatures compared with the Necrons. 3 mid-sized monstrous creatures with a Screamer Killer, Neurotyrant and Psychophage. 40 infantry models besides that, and at least a few of them slightly elite like the Barbgaunts and the Von Ryan Sleepers, and a Winged Prime to lead the set. Overall, just for the sheer amount and value of the miniatures if they'd been sold separately, I would say to me it does look like the Leviathan offering did seem better than Indomitus, and Indomitus was pretty great. The people responding to the poll, given it was so recent, maybe not too surprising that pretty much everyone said that they had the opportunity to pick up Leviathan. It is still in stock in plenty of places around the world, if not from Games Workshop's web store. In the UK in particular, it still looks like Element Games has got very good stock of it, though it's being sold at the original £150 price. I'll leave the link to that down in the video description, and it is a channel affiliate link if you did want to pick up this particular starter set. Overall though, it looks like 2/3 of you who were polled wanted to pick this up. Pretty impressive numbers there, and it looks like it beats out Indomitus and Dark Imperium, though maybe not some older things like the 5th edition and 2nd edition set, according to my numbers at least. Though as mentioned, I do wonder if there's a bit of selection bias there. In any case though, I feel like just on an objective level, I wouldn't really have too much problems putting this in the first place. I think they knocked it out of the park with most of the sculpts here. The Terminators were great, and the Screamer Killer, Neurotyrant and Psychophage, I thought all of those were rather awesome. And even if it did wind up being the single most expensive box set, even adjusting for inflation, it's also the one with by far the most content. Let me know what you think though, which of these starter box sets is the best in your opinion. I'm sure plenty of people will have a bit of nostalgia for ones they picked up over the years and have good memories of. There were a couple of other kind of interesting things that I noticed through the data. These ones are the graphs of how many people either bought the starter set or said they weren't collecting Warhammer at that time. I did notice that for the most part it's a completely downward trend with how many people said they weren't collecting, as you'd kind of expect. But interestingly, it looks like there were more people collecting Warhammer 40K in 5th edition versus the 6th edition Dark Vengeance set, which does feel like it ties in with what I'd anecdotally guess. The game was in a bit of a sorry state in 6th and 7th and was losing a lot of popularity. So it looks like plenty of people took a break for 6th and 7th edition, given that more people said that they weren't playing when you'd usually expect less. And Dark Vengeance was on offer for 5 years as opposed to the 4 that Black Reach was. I feel like this also shows that the Battle for Macragge box set was really quite unpopular compared with the rest. Looks like people were well up for the 2nd and 5th edition box sets and were kind of okay with the 3rd, but it seems that a lot of people maybe went from the 3rd edition, skipped Battle for Macragge, and then went to the 5th edition box set, and that was definitely true of my own experiences there. I personally picked up the 3rd, 5th, 8th, 9th and 10th ones, and skipped out on the 4th and 6th, though I did pick up some of those Ravenwing style bikers second hand. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts on these though. Let me know which box set was best down in the comments and why. It'll be interesting to hear your guys' takes. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that the channel does have a Patreon page as well, and that's the main way that I can continue to make content each and every day for you guys to watch. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.